Well, you can hear the warmth that Marcus Rashford has for the manager that's gone, but it has been a struggle for United this season. What makes them so different, Roy, to the three teams out in front? Why have they fallen so far off the pace?
They're not working as hard as the three teams you've mentioned, the three teams at the top who were obviously brilliant. You've got a lot of talent, obviously well coached, but they run. United players stopped running the last couple of months. Marcus there, I know it's difficult. These interviews sometimes for players, when a manager's lost his job, he said, we have to take responsibility, but these players don't. We saw a great example there after a Watford game, players going over and obviously trying to defend the manager, but it's too late. The damage is done. These players need to... I did say it, over last year or two, lepers don't change their spots. Man United have talented players, particularly in possession, but unfortunately the game is about also when you're out of possession. If you want to compare them to Chelsea, Liverpool and Man City, it's chalk and cheese. These players don't run, they don't sprint, they don't close down, they don't work as a team, they work as individuals, and they're almost just dependent on their talent, which is coming up short as well. That's not enough to win the big prizes, and it's not good enough. So what we've seen over the last month or two is just... again, we talk about culture. Again, I don't know what's going on in terms of on the training pitch every single day, but the signs are at weekends, this United group don't work hard enough. They don't seem like good enough lads to me in terms of that leadership, that person. I keep saying it, but that's what you need sometimes in difficult spells. And the players know even when they get interviewed, I don't just mean Marcus, when they get interviewed after games, they're like robots. It's just, they're saying, oh, Ollie, even when a lot of over the last week, when a lot of players are talking about the manager leaving, even if I had to keep saying Ollie, Ollie was their manager, he was their gaffer, whatever you want to... just talking to Ollie as if maybe Ollie was too friendly with him. Maybe Ollie was too friendly. Maybe that was a problem. Maybe he was too nice to these lads, because these lads have done what I predicted and they've thrown him under the bus. And that's what they do.
Problems off the ball. That was the first thing you said, Roy, there, though. And maybe this gives us a clue as to why they've turned to the man on the right there, Ralf Rangnick. On the left, you can see his last season as a coach with Leipzig, a season in which they finished third in Bundesliga. And on the right are Manchester United's comparative stats this season in the Premier League. Bottom on tackles, successful pressures right near the bottom, all these categories, pressures in the final third, interceptions, recoveries, and you can see the difference between that Leipzig team that works so hard out of possession and this Manchester United team right now. Even goals conceded, Newcastle and Norwich, the only two sides to concede more goals than this Manchester United side, and Leipzig conceded fewer even than Bayern Munich, who won the title that season. And what of Ralf Rangnick then and what he thinks of football? Well, he was here in London back in September at the Coach's Voice coaching conference, and he gave us a little taster of his ideas of how the game should be played.
We have 5 different situations in football that in the end decide football games. What happens if we have the ball ourselves? How do we play against defensive teams, against teams that maybe attack high or try to press us? So you need to have, as a coach, a very clear idea of how do we want to play if we have the ball ourselves. Number 2 is, what do we want to do if the other team has got the ball? What kind of information, match plan, game plan do I give my players when the other team has got the ball? Our idea is clear. It's very, very similar to my... I would almost say coaching friend Jürgen Klopp. Our football, our Red Bull football is heavy metal, rock and roll, and it's not slow waltz, we hate square passes, back passes. Just having the ball ourselves as la pour la doesn't make sense. And then we have the 2 situations of transition. What happens in the very moment when we lose the ball, and what happens in the very moment when we win the ball. This is number 3 and number 4. And then, of course, you have the set pieces, also highly important. More than 30% of all the goals are being scored after set pieces. So those are the 5 situations. And all the top teams, if you look into the last 2 or 3 years of the Champions League winning teams, they were in all 5 areas above average, if not top. And I'm convinced in the future that if you want to win titles, if you want to win the Champions League, if you want to win the World Cup with the national team, you have to make sure that in all those 5 areas you are state of art. And this is what we're always trying to do.
So that's Ralph Rangnick talking to the coach's voice. Is that what Manchester United need right now?
Yes, in that there's a clear plan of what they want to do. So you can just see that by listening to that manager. He has a clear idea of exactly what he wants to do. When you watch Manchester United, certainly in these last few weeks when it hasn't gone well for them, you would not quite sure what they were doing. Certainly against Liverpool, were they pressing as a team? Were they, some players were pressing, some were dropping off? There wasn't a clear plan. I've said before, there's no exact science how to win a football game, or one way works and others don't. There's different ways, different managers, we all see the game differently. But Manchester United have not had a clear plan of exactly what they want to do. This guy you can listen to has got a clear plan. The problem he's going to have, though, in the next 6 months is his plan of how the game should be played is chalk and cheese to what we see with Manchester United. There's 5 or 6 players at Manchester United, straight away you think they're not going to fit into that system, that way of playing. Jurgen Klopp said something really interesting in his press conference on Friday, and the problem he had when he came to England. This is not a case of just saying, right, lads, I want you to sprint and close that man down when he's got the ball. This needs to be coached. This needs to be trained. This is not something that you work on and it's done in a week. In England, because we have so many games, it's difficult to find the time to train. And also, if you remember when Jurgen Klopp first came in, how many injuries he had, players pulling muscles, because it's not a case of just do this, a week's training. You've got to learn how to train like that in terms of the physical output in training to then be able to take that onto the pitch. You're talking about a team having to cover maybe another 10 or 12k a game. So you have to train like that. And that in itself is going to cause injury. So that may make it difficult for them to get Manchester United into the top 4.
What questions do you have about this appointment?
No, I think it's fine. I have no real problem with it. I think it's just the situation it is. Again, the big issue, Jamie made a point, is about him picking the next manager. And what he said there in the interview, that's... I think
it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science,
I
what
think
you're saying.
that's the game for the last... And it'll be the same the next 100 years. And again, in football, if it was about just being in possession, I'd still be playing. But a lot of time you're not in possession. And we've seen the stats with the United lads. So there's not new there. But I think, again, the big decision over the next few months is, again, getting the right manager in and getting players to run. Like Ronaldo and Fernandes, Pogba, even Rashford, they've stopped running out of possession. So that's the biggest challenge, getting these lads on side to start closing teams down, because United have the talent and it does need coaching, and United do have to improve on set pieces, of course. But
you have to stay with it. If you're going this direction now, you have to stay. It's gone from one extreme to another with Man United. You have to stay with it. Even if it is, you're going to have a little bad spell, stay with it, believe in what you're doing, make the plan, stay with the plan, because eventually you will come out at the other side. But you have to stay with it.
Well, there are some questions on this imminent appointment of Ralph Rangnick, and let's see if we can answer some of them with a man who knows him very well, Raphael Honigstein, a German football expert who's here today working with Sky Deutschland. Good afternoon to you, Rafa. Thanks for joining us. First of all, one of the accusations that's been labelled at Ralph Rangnick is that he hasn't won too many trophies for a coach who's been doing it for an awful long time. What would you say about that?
I'd say it's not an accusation, it's a fact. He's only won the German FA Cup. But I think the context of winning needs to be looked at closely for the exact coaching job in hand. If your job is to take a third division side into the Bundesliga, a village side of 3,000 people population, and make them into a real contender, and you do that in 3 or 4 years, then you're winning, then you're doing your job. If somebody hands you the keys to a couple of clubs and says, we want to build a football group with a very clearly defined playing structure, with young players, with players that nobody knows about, we buy them very cheaply, and then you can sell them on like a Sadio Mane, Dayo Upamecano, Naby Keita, and we want to take that club from the 4th division to the Bundesliga, make them a Champions League type, and you deliver on that. Are you winning? I'd argue yes. But there is also a deeper reason, or perhaps a slightly misunderstood part of his CV. When he was at the very height of his coaching power in 2011, he'd just taken Schalke to the Champions League final. He just won the German FA Cup with them. 3 months into the next season, he resigned, citing a burnout syndrome. He was just fatigued, he couldn't go on. And I believe he continued coaching at that point for the next 10 years, rather than taking a sidestep and becoming a club builder with Leipzig and having only intermittent couple of years on the bench with them. He'd have a very different CV. But because he took that sidestep and got a different job, not really a coaching job, a club building job, his CV looks the way it is.
Is that why as well, Rafa? Some people might say that if he was that good in Germany, why has he not taken a Bayern Munich or even the national team?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and I think the answer is twofold. One, I think when he came through in the late 90s, guys like him wouldn't get good jobs because he's not a former player. He doesn't have a big name. German football at the time didn't have Klopps and Tuchels, people who come from almost nowhere. Okay, Klopp was a former player, but second division. But these kind of guys, Julian Nagelsmann, he broke the mold. It was through his success that years later it's now perceived normal that you don't have to be been a player. So those jobs were beyond him then. And then when he was in a position to get these jobs, because he'd worked at places like Hoffenheim and Leipzig, where he was really in a position to decide absolutely everything, as sort of Alex Ferguson squared or cubed everything through him, then it was difficult, I think, for the clubs to say, okay, we want you to do the same thing, but we don't want you to do the same thing because we have a sporting director with other people. So there was never really the ideal fit. And maybe the same problem was in the Premier League in the past as well. And this is why I think maybe through this slightly different route, he's actually ended up here now.